The Duke of Blackwood, Alistair Beaumont, considered the matter of his impending marriage with the same dispassionate logic he applied to the rotation of his crops or the acquisition of a new colt. It was a matter of lineage, of duty, and of finding a woman who would not prove to be an inconvenience. He required an heir, a placid domestic landscape, and a duchess who would understand that his life, his true life of politics, scholarship, and quiet intellectual pursuits, was a closed and sovereign territory. He had settled on Miss Eleanor Vance for reasons that were, to his mind, eminently practical. Her bloodline was impeccable, if uninspired. Her dowry was sufficient, a welcome balm to an estate still recovering from his father's more flamboyant expenditures. Most importantly, she was quiet. He had observed her on 3 separate occasions in society, and on each she had been a study in serene stillness. She did not chatter. She did not angle for attention. She seemed a creature of pale watercolors, content to blend into the background, while others fought to be rendered in oils. This was, he concluded, her primary virtue. "She is suitable," he remarked to Lord Harrington, swirling the amber of his brandy in its glass. The fire in his private study cast long shadows, turning the rows of leather-bound books into dark, silent sentinels. Harrington, a man whose primary virtue was his tailor, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Suitable, Blackwood. That is the word one uses for a dependable horse. We are speaking of your duchess." "And I require a dependable duchess," Alistair replied, his tone clipped. "I have no time for the hysterics and manipulations that pass for feminine charm. Miss Vance will run the household competently, produce an heir, and leave me to my work. She will not demand my constant attention." "But will she not bore you to tears?" Harrington pressed, leaning forward with a conspiratorial gleam in his eye. "They say she has no conversation beyond the weather and needlepoint. Even the Archbishop is dining with you next month after the wedding. A brilliant man, a man who appreciates discourse. She will bore the Archbishop." Alistair considered this. He pictured Miss Vance at his table, a silent, decorative object placed between himself and the formidable intellect of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He imagined her offering a hesitant comment on the seasonal rains. The image was not thrilling, but it was not alarming either. It was simply neutral. Her presence would be a quiet hum, not a discordant shriek. He gave a small, dismissive shrug. "The Archbishop is coming to discuss ecclesiastical land reforms, not to be entertained by my wife. She will preside with grace and then withdraw. It is the natural order of things." He took a sip of his brandy, the matter settled in his mind. The phrase, however, hung in the air, a small, polished stone of a judgment. She will bore the Archbishop. It was not merely a prediction. It was a statement of fact, a neat categorization of the woman he was about to make his wife. He had observed her, assessed her, and filed her away. The transaction was nearly complete. Miss Eleanor Vance, for her part, understood the nature of the transaction perfectly. She was not a fool, though she had long cultivated an appearance of benign simplicity that the world found comfortable. It was a shield. A quiet girl in a pale dress was left alone. She was not expected to have opinions on parliamentary debates or the nuances of Latin translation. She was not expected to have a mind at all, merely a set of gentle accomplishments. This public persona gave her private world an almost sacred quality. It was a world of books, of quiet study, of letters exchanged with obscure scholars under a discreet male pseudonym. It was a world where her mind could run free, untethered by the suffocating weight of expectation. She knew precisely what the Duke of Blackwood saw when he looked at her. A solution. A well-bred, quiet, manageable solution to the problem of his ducal line. She did not begrudge him his assessment. It was, after all, the same lens through which the rest of the world viewed her. She did not love him. She did not expect to. She expected civility, a well-run household that she would be entrusted to manage, and the freedom of a vast, new library. It was a fair trade for her name and her person. She had analyzed the terms and found them acceptable. Their first formal meeting after the engagement was announced took place in her aunt's drawing room. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and the unspoken pressure of matrimonial arrangement. The Duke was precisely as she had anticipated. Tall, impeccably dressed, with an air of intellectual austerity that was more intimidating than any physical swagger. His eyes, a cool, clear gray, assessed her with a polite detachment that she found almost amusing. He was cataloguing her, just as he had in the ballrooms of London. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "I trust you are well." "Quite well, Your Grace," she replied, her own voice soft, impeccably modulated. "And you?" It was a conversational gambit as old as time, a meaningless exchange of pleasantries. He spoke of his journey. She spoke of the weather. Her aunt, Mrs. Gable, fluttered nervously, offering tea and commentary in equal measure. Eleanor watched the Duke from beneath her lashes. She saw the faint lines of concentration around his eyes, the way his long fingers rested on his knee, perfectly still. He was a man who prized control, a man who valued order. He stayed for precisely 1 hour. It was a performance of duty on his part, and she matched him, note for perfect note. She was calm. She was placid. She was everything he had bargained for. As he rose to leave, his gaze swept over the small table beside her chair, where a book lay open. It was a slim volume of pastoral poetry, safe, acceptable. He would not have noticed the heavier tome, a dense work on Carolingian ecclesiastical law that she had hastily tucked beneath a cushion upon his arrival. He inclined his head. "Until next week, Miss Vance." "Your Grace." He left. The room seemed to exhale in his absence. Her aunt fanned herself vigorously. "Well, he is a duke through and through, so commanding. And you were perfect, Eleanor, so serene." Eleanor smiled a small, private smile. She had been perfectly serene. She had been precisely what was required. She retrieved her book from under the cushion, its dense, academic prose a comfort and a secret. The transaction was proceeding as planned. The wedding was an exercise in tasteful magnificence. It was less a celebration of union than a confirmation of status. Alistair stood at the altar, watching his bride approach on the arm of her uncle. She was a vision in cream silk and lace, her face obscured by a veil. She was an abstraction, a symbol of continuity, the future Duchess of Blackwood. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, the same he felt upon closing a successful land deal. He had done his duty. He had secured the future. During the reception at his London residence, he performed his role with flawless precision. He accepted congratulations, engaged in brief, necessary conversations, and ensured his new duchess was never left unattended. He observed her as she navigated the crush of society. She was graceful, poised, and utterly unrevealing. Her smile was a constant, gentle curve. Her responses were polite and brief. She was, he noted with approval, making no effort to charm or dominate. She was simply present. He experienced a brief, unexpected moment of recalibration during a conversation with the French ambassador. The ambassador, a man known for his sharp intellect and sharper tongue, had been speaking to Eleanor. As Alistair approached, he caught the tail end of her reply. She had said something in flawless, unaccented French, a remark that was both witty and subtly political. The ambassador laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "Your Duchess has a formidable mind, Your Grace," the ambassador remarked to Alistair, his eyes twinkling. "You must be very proud." Alistair glanced at Eleanor. Her expression was once again placid, her eyes downcast. It was as if the flash of brilliance had never happened. He assumed she was merely repeating some phrase she had been taught, a parlor trick of memory. It was a fleeting anomaly, a brief flicker in the steady, low light of her personality. He dismissed it. Later that evening, in the carriage on the way to Blackwood Manor, the ducal seat, a heavy silence settled between them. She sat opposite him, a still figure in the darkness, the faint light from the passing moon illuminating the pale oval of her face. He felt no particular need to speak. He had acquired a wife. He had not acquired a conversational partner. He cleared his throat, feeling a sudden, inexplicable duty to say something. "The estate is in good order. I trust you will find the household accounts satisfactory. Mr. Finch, my solicitor, will present them to you tomorrow." "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was as soft as it had been in her aunt's drawing room. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, has been with the family for 30 years. She is efficient. I look forward to meeting her." The conversation died. He found himself studying her, trying to reconcile the quiet creature before him with the woman who had made the French ambassador laugh. It did not compute. He decided, finally, that the ambassador had simply been flattering him by flattering his new wife. It was a common diplomatic tactic. The conclusion satisfied him, restoring his initial assessment. She was what she appeared to be: quiet, simple, suitable. The source of his error, the seed of his eventual undoing, was a simple piece of paper. It was a letter he had written to his cousin a week before the wedding. He had been in his study, a glass of brandy at his elbow, feeling particularly pleased with the logical precision of his marital arrangements. He had dashed off a few lines, a missive full of the casual arrogance that characterized their correspondence. In it, he described Eleanor with the cool detachment of a naturalist describing a specimen. "She is perfectly docile," he wrote, "possesses no troublesome opinions, and will blend into the furnishings as required. Harrington frets she will bore the Archbishop at dinner next month, and I have no doubt he is correct. But that is a small price to pay for a lifetime of domestic tranquility." He had folded the letter, but had been distracted by the arrival of his steward before he could seal it. He had left it lying on his desk, nestled within a folio of estate papers. It was an act of careless oversight, the kind of mistake a man who is utterly certain of his world and his place in it is prone to making. Eleanor, now the Duchess of Blackwood, entered her new life with a quiet sense of purpose. Her first week was a whirlwind of introductions and inspections. She met with the housekeeper, the steward, the head groom. She walked the vast, echoing halls of the manor, her footsteps a small, solitary sound in the immense quiet. The house was magnificent, a testament to centuries of accumulated power and wealth. It was also a place of rigid order, every object, every servant, every minute of the day governed by the Duke's exacting standards. Her domain was to be the domestic sphere. The Duke made this clear on their second morning. He handed her a heavy ring of keys. "Mrs. Gable will show you everything," he said, his tone polite but final. "The accounts are to be kept in the morning room. I take my breakfast at 8 precisely. Dinner is at 7. I am not to be disturbed in my library after 9 in the evening." They were not instructions so much as the delineation of borders. His territory. Her territory. She found the letter on the third day. She had gone to his study, a place she had been tacitly forbidden from entering, in search of a particular book on local history she had seen on a high shelf. The Duke was out riding the estate boundaries. The room was empty, smelling faintly of old paper, leather, and his cologne. It felt like the heart of his power, a place of profound and masculine silence. She saw the folio on his desk, slightly askew. Her name, Miss Vance, caught her eye. It was his handwriting, bold and decisive. Curiosity, a sharp and uncharacteristic impulse, pricked at her. She told herself it was a breach of privacy. She told herself it was wrong, but a stronger, colder instinct, the instinct for self-preservation, urged her forward. She picked up the folded sheet of paper. She read it once, then she read it again. The words were not cruel in the way of a raised voice or a thrown object. They were far worse. They were the calm, dismissive, final judgment of a superior intellect upon an inferior one. Perfectly docile. No troublesome opinions. Will blend into the furnishings. She will bore the Archbishop. A profound coldness settled deep within her, a quiet, crystalline stillness. There was no anger. Anger was a hot, messy emotion, and what she felt was the precise opposite. It was a moment of absolute clarity. She finally understood the full terms of their transaction. He had not married a woman. He had acquired a piece of furniture, a decorative and functional object that was expected to be silent, beautiful, and undemanding. She folded the letter with meticulous care, creasing it exactly along its original lines. She placed it back inside the folio, aligning it perfectly with the other papers. She straightened the folio on the desk. She had not disturbed a single thing. No one would ever know she had been there. A door did not slam in the house. A voice was not raised. No tears were shed. But somewhere deep inside Eleanor, Duchess of Blackwood, a door closed. It did not bang shut. It clicked into place with a quiet, final, and irreversible sound. The performance she had been giving, the role of the placid and agreeable wife, had just ended its run. She would still be the Duchess. She would still be graceful and serene, but she would no longer be present. He had purchased a shell, and a shell was precisely what he would get. Alistair did not notice the change at first. How could he? He was a man who noticed shifts in political alliances, errors in crop rotation, and split infinitives in scholarly texts. He was not a man who noticed the subtle, atmospheric shifts in a woman's soul. To him, his wife was as she had always been, quiet, graceful, and efficient. The household continued to run with impeccable smoothness. The meals were excellent. The linens were fresh. The servants were well managed. His new Duchess was a model of domestic competence. He would see her at breakfast, where she would inquire politely about his plans for the day. He would see her at dinner, where she would listen to his discourse on matters of state or philosophy with an expression of serene attentiveness. She was the perfect Duchess. It was perhaps a week later that the first faint sense of disquiet registered. It was a subtle thing, something he could not quite name. It began with the music. His wife, he had been told, played the pianoforte with considerable skill. During their first few days at the manor, a gentle melody would often drift from the music room in the late afternoon. It was a pleasant, unobtrusive sound that had become part of the house's daily rhythm. Then it stopped. He did not consciously register its absence for several days. But one afternoon, as he sat in his library, the silence of the house pressed in on him. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a hollow one, an empty one. He realized he had not heard the pianoforte in some time. He made a mental note to ask her about it at dinner. That evening, across the long, polished expanse of the dining table, he looked at her. She was wearing a gown of deep blue that made her skin look like porcelain. She was, he admitted to himself, an exceptionally beautiful woman. But her beauty was like that of a statue in a museum, perfect, remote, and cold. "I have not heard you play the pianoforte lately, Eleanor," he said, the use of her first name feeling slightly foreign on his tongue. She looked up from her plate, her eyes meeting his for a brief, unreadable moment. "No, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. He waited for an explanation. None was offered. The silence stretched. "Are the keys sticking? I can have the tuner sent from London," he offered, feeling an odd need to solve this small domestic problem. "The instrument is in excellent condition," she replied. "I simply have not had the inclination to play." And that was all. She returned her attention to her meal. The conversation, if it could be called that, was over. He was left with a strange sense of having been gently but firmly shut out. It was a new and unsettling sensation. The accumulation of clues began. They were small things, disconnected observations that pricked at the edge of his consciousness. He noticed the chair she usually occupied in the evenings in the grand salon. The one near the window was always empty now. She would retire to her chambers immediately after dinner, pleading a slight headache or correspondence to attend to. He noticed that the books in the library were being subtly rearranged. Volumes he had not touched in years were appearing on the lower shelves, sometimes with a thin slip of paper marking a page. He pulled one out one day, a dense, scholarly work on Roman aqueducts. The marked page contained a complex engineering diagram. He found it odd, but assumed a footman had been clumsy while dusting. He began to pay more attention to her at the dinner table. He had always treated their meals as an opportunity for him to organize his thoughts, often speaking at length on a topic that interested him. He had assumed she was listening. Now, watching her, he saw that while her posture was attentive, her eyes were distant. She was present and she was absent. She was there and she was not there. He was speaking into a void. The realization was deeply unnerving. He had wanted a quiet wife. He had not realized there were different kinds of quiet. There was the quiet of contentment, and there was the quiet of absence. His wife was an expert in the latter. The catalyst for his dawning awareness came from an unlikely source: Mr. Finch, his dry, precise solicitor. Finch had been with the family for 40 years, a man of unimpeachable discretion and keen observation. He came to the manor once a week to review accounts and legal matters with the Duke. One Tuesday, after they had concluded their business, Finch hesitated at the door of the study. "If I may, Your Grace." "What is it, Finch?" Alistair asked, already turning his attention back to a map of his northern territories. "It is about the Duchess's quarterly review of the tenant farmers' reports," Finch said, his tone neutral. "She has made several annotations." Alistair looked up, annoyed. "Annotations? I told you to give her the household accounts, not the estate ledgers. She has no head for such things." Finch cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound. "With respect, Your Grace, her notes are remarkably astute. She has identified a discrepancy in the grain yields from the western fields that, I confess, both myself and the steward had overlooked. She suggests a novel four-field rotation system, citing a rather obscure agricultural treatise published in Munich last year. In German, I believe." He held out a sheaf of papers. Her handwriting is very neat. Alistair took the papers. There, in the margins of the steward's blocky, utilitarian script, was a delicate, flowing hand. The notes were precise, intelligent, and displayed a breathtaking grasp of agricultural science. He stared at the page, a profound sense of cognitive dissonance washing over him. This was not the work of a woman whose interests were confined to needlepoint and the weather. This was the work of a first-rate mind. "Where did she learn German?" he asked, the question sounding hollow in his own ears. "I could not say, Your Grace," Finch replied, his face a perfect mask of professional deference. But Alistair saw a flicker of something in the old man's eyes. Not pity, but a kind of knowing sadness. Finch had seen it. Finch knew. He had probably known from the beginning. That night, Alistair watched his wife across the dinner table with new eyes. He saw not a placid surface, but a carefully constructed facade. He saw not simplicity, but a deeply guarded complexity. He saw a stranger. Who was this woman he had married? Who was this person who read German agricultural treatises and understood crop rotation better than his own steward? He thought about the French ambassador's comment. "Your Duchess has a formidable mind." He thought about the books being moved in the library. He thought about the cessation of the music. Each clue, once a disconnected anomaly, now began to snap into place, forming a picture he did not understand and did not like, a picture of his own profound and arrogant blindness. The Archbishop's visit loomed. What had once been a matter of routine social duty now felt like a test he was certain he was about to fail. He had predicted, with such casual cruelty, that she would bore the man. Now he was consumed by a different fear. He was afraid the Archbishop, a man of genuine brilliance, would see in Eleanor what Alistair had so spectacularly failed to see. And in doing so, he would expose the Duke's own shallowness, his own unforgivable lack of perception. The thought was galling. The day arrived. The Archbishop of Canterbury was a man whose gentle demeanor belied a razor-sharp intellect and a deep, scholarly piety. He arrived in the late afternoon, and Alistair escorted him to the grand salon where Eleanor was waiting. She rose to greet him, a figure of perfect ducal grace in a gown of dove gray. She curtsied. "Your Grace," she said, her voice calm and low. "Welcome to Blackwood." Alistair watched the exchange, his nerves stretched taut. He expected the usual polite inanities, the stilted conversation that would confirm his worst fears and his own earlier judgment. The Archbishop smiled warmly. "Duchess, it is a pleasure. The Duke speaks very highly of your grace and composure." The slight hesitation was telling. Alistair had praised her for her quietness, her decorative qualities, and the Archbishop, a man attuned to nuance, had translated it accurately. They sat. Tea was served. The conversation began, as it always did, with pleasantries. But then the Archbishop, whose passion was theology, turned to Eleanor. "I was most intrigued, Duchess," he began, "by a monograph I read recently on the Pelagian heresy, published under the name E. Vance. The scholarship was extraordinary. I was told the author resided in this part of the country. I do not suppose you are familiar with the work." Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. He stared at his wife. Her expression did not change. There was no flicker of surprise, no sign of triumph. She simply met the Archbishop's gaze with a calm, level stare. "I have some familiarity with the subject, Your Grace," she said quietly. The Archbishop leaned forward, his eyes alight with intellectual fire. The author's refutation of Augustine's later arguments on predestination was masterful, particularly the linguistic analysis of the original Greek texts. It is a position I have long considered, but have never seen articulated with such clarity. Tell me, Duchess, what are your thoughts on the translation of Gratia in the context of the Second Council of Orange? And then Alistair watched, in a state of suspended disbelief, as his wife, his quiet, simple, suitable wife, began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesticulate. But she engaged the Archbishop of Canterbury in a theological debate of such breathtaking depth and complexity that Alistair felt as if he were listening to a foreign language. She spoke of Augustine and Pelagius, of councils and heresies, of Greek and Latin etymology. She parried the Archbishop's points with gentle but irrefutable logic. She offered insights that were not just intelligent, but profound. She was not boring the Archbishop. She was dazzling him. Alistair sat in his own drawing room, a silent, stunned spectator. He was invisible. The two greatest intellects in the room were his wife and his guest, and they had created a world of discourse that he could not enter. He, the Duke of Blackwood, the scholar, the man of reason, was the one who was out of his depth. The conversation continued through dinner. The topic shifted from theology to history to philosophy. With every sentence she spoke, Eleanor dismantled the image he had built of her. She was not a watercolor. She was a Renaissance masterpiece, full of depth and shadow and detail he had never bothered to look for. The Synod was the following week. It was a major ecclesiastical conference, and the Archbishop was to give the keynote address. On the second day of the conference, a message arrived for Alistair. It was from his cousin, who was in attendance. The note was short, almost frantic. Blackwood, you will not believe this. The Archbishop, in his address on modern theological challenges, just cited an anonymous monograph on Pelagianism, twice. He called it one of the most brilliant pieces of lay scholarship of our generation. Everyone is asking who this E. Vance is. Is this some relation of your new Duchess? Alistair read the note. He stood in his library, the place of his own supposed intellectual superiority, and the full, crushing weight of his failure descended upon him. E. Vance. Eleanor Vance. It had been there all along. Her name, right there in plain sight. He had seen it, and he had not seen it. He thought of the letter, the cruel, dismissive, arrogant letter he had left on his desk. She will bore the Archbishop. He now knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she had seen it. That was the day the music had stopped. That was the day she had withdrawn from him, not in anger, but in a silence far more profound. She had not confronted him. She had not accused him. She had simply accepted his judgment of her and retired behind it, leaving him with the empty shell he had paid for. His epiphany was not a flash of light. It was a slow, sickening descent into a darkness of his own making. He saw everything. He saw his own monumental pride, his lazy assumptions, his comfortable misogyny. He had judged her without knowing her, classified her without seeing her, and in doing so had committed an act of intellectual and spiritual vandalism. He had taken a brilliant, vibrant mind and tried to furnish his house with it. He went to his desk, his hands shaking slightly. He opened the folio of papers. The letter was still there. He picked it up. It had been folded and unfolded several times, the creases worn soft. She had not just read it once. She must have taken it out, read it again and again, absorbing the full measure of his dismissal. The thought was like a physical blow. He had to find her. He had to speak to her. But what could he possibly say? I'm sorry? The words were laughably inadequate. They were a child's apology for a broken vase, not a man's atonement for a shattered soul. He found her, as he knew he would, in the library. Not his grand, formal library on the ground floor, but the small, forgotten one in the East Wing. It was a dusty, neglected room filled with the unfashionable books of previous generations. The afternoon sun slanted through the grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. She was sitting in a worn leather armchair, a heavy book open in her lap. She did not look up when he entered. He was not sure if she had even heard him. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of a page turning. He stood there for a long moment, feeling like an intruder in his own house. This was her space, her sanctuary, the one place he had never bothered to enter. And so it was the one place she could be herself. He looked at the books piled around her chair. Greek philosophy, advanced mathematics, German poetry. It was the landscape of a mind he had declared barren. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was rough. She turned a page, her movements slow and deliberate. She did not acknowledge him. He took a step forward. "I came to—" He stopped. What had he come to do? Apologize? Explain? Justify? All of it felt hollow. He started again, choosing the only path that felt true, the path of confession. "I was wrong," he said. The words were quiet, but they seemed to thunder in the silent room. She slowly closed her book, marking her page with a finger. She raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were not angry. They were not hurt. They were simply empty. It was the most devastating expression he had ever seen. It was the look of someone for whom nothing he said could possibly matter anymore. "About what, specifically, were you wrong, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice cool and precise. "Your assessment of the weather? Your choice of wine for dinner? You are a man of many opinions. You must be more specific." The quiet, clinical nature of her response was more cutting than any tirade. She was dissecting him, using the same intellectual rigor she applied to a theological text. He held out the letter, his own damning words. "About this, about you." She glanced at the paper in his hand, but made no move to take it. "I see," she said. "The Archbishop enjoyed my company, so your initial assessment has been revised. Your judgment is based on the validation of another man. How very predictable." He flinched. Her words were true. His realization had been prompted not by his own perception, but by the reflection of her brilliance in the Archbishop's eyes. It was another layer to his failure. "No," he said, his voice raw. "It started before that. The music stopping, the estate accounts, I was beginning to see, but I was too arrogant to understand what I was seeing. The Archbishop, he only confirmed what a blind fool I have been." He took another step closer. He thought about kneeling, but it felt like a theatrical, meaningless gesture. This was not a problem that could be solved with dramatics. It required the hard, unglamorous work of rebuilding from ruins. "I did not marry a woman, Eleanor. I acquired an asset. I assessed you as I would a property. I cataloged your virtues and found you suitable. I never once thought to look for the person within, the mind, the soul. I did not see you at all." He paused, the confession costing him more than any admission of political or financial failure ever had. "It is the single greatest error of my life." She watched him, her expression unchanging. "And what do you want from me now, Alistair? Absolution." Do you want me to tell you that it is all right, that your error is forgiven, and we can now proceed as a proper husband and wife? Do you want me to start playing the pianoforte again so the house feels less empty for you? Each question was a perfectly aimed dart. She saw right through him to the selfish core of his regret. He was uncomfortable in his silent house. He was embarrassed by his own misjudgment. His atonement was still, in some way, about himself. "I want nothing from you," he said, and the words, as he spoke them, became true. He let go of his own need for comfort, for forgiveness. "I am not here to ask for anything. I am here to state a fact. I was wrong. You are the most intelligent, formidable, and fascinating person I have ever met, and I was too blind and too proud to see it. That is my failing and my loss. It is not your responsibility to fix it or to make me feel better about it." He placed the letter on a nearby table. He did not burn it. It was his shame to bear, not to destroy. "Whatever you wish to do," he said, his voice quiet, "you will have my full support. If you wish to continue your scholarship, this library, and any in England, is yours. If you wish to publish under your own name, I will champion you. If you wish for a separate life, one of quiet study here while I remain in London, I will grant it. You have my name and my protection. The rest is your own. I relinquished any claim to it when I wrote that letter." He turned and walked away, leaving her in the dusty silence of her sanctuary. He had not offered an apology. He had offered her freedom. It was the only thing of value he had to give. Eleanor did not immediately capitulate. His confession, however sincere, could not instantly erase the profound dismissal that had defined the start of their marriage. Words were easy. He had used words to categorize her and dismiss her. He could use them again to try and reclaim her. She required evidence. She required a change not of language, but of action. She did not change her routine. She continued to take her meals, to oversee the household, and to spend her afternoons and evenings in the East Wing library. The door to her private world remained closed, but she watched him. He did not press her. He did not demand her company or her conversation. Instead, he began a slow, quiet campaign of attention. He started leaving books for her on the table outside the East Wing library. Not novels or poetry, but works he knew would interest her. A new archaeological survey of Crete, a political treatise from a radical Viennese philosopher, a collection of letters between Voltaire and Rousseau. There was never a note. The books were simply a silent offering, an acknowledgement. One evening, he came to dinner with a sheaf of papers. He did not speak of politics or estate matters. He laid a page on the table between them. It was a Latin text from the Vatican Library he had copied and sent. "There is a passage here," he said, his voice devoid of any demand. "In the third paragraph. The verb tense seems ambiguous. I have my own interpretation, but I confess I am at a loss. I was wondering what you would make of it." It was a test, but it was not a test of her. It was a test of himself. He was not asking for her opinion as a courtesy. He was asking because he genuinely valued it. He was admitting his own uncertainty and inviting her, as an equal, into his intellectual world. She looked at him, then at the text. She read it carefully. "The author uses a subjunctive of characteristic," she said, her voice even. "He is not stating what the Pope did, but rather what kind of man the Pope was, that he would do such a thing. It is a comment on his nature, not a record of his action." He read the passage again, her explanation illuminating the words, a slow look of understanding, of genuine admiration, dawned on his face. "Of course," he said, almost to himself. "Of course. That makes perfect sense." He looked up at her. "Thank you, Eleanor." It was a small moment, a single conversation over a piece of Latin prose. But it was the first stone laid in the foundation of something new. The rebuilding period was slow. It was a season of quiet gestures. He began to join her in the East Wing library. He would not sit with her, not at first. He would select a book and retreat to a far corner of the room, reading in silence. He was not demanding her attention, merely sharing her space. He was learning her language, the language of quiet companionship. Gradually, they began to talk. Their conversation started with the books they were reading, but slowly, tentatively, they expanded. He asked her about her childhood, about how she had cultivated her extraordinary education in a world that did not value it. She told him of her father, a reclusive country scholar who had treated her as his intellectual heir, teaching her Greek and Latin before she had learned to properly curtsy. She spoke of the pseudonym, the secret world of correspondence that had been her only outlet. He, in turn, spoke to her not of his duties, but of his passions. He confessed his frustrations with Parliament, his dreams of agricultural reform, his deep and abiding love for the history contained within the walls of his own home. He was not the Duke of Blackwood speaking to his Duchess. He was Alistair speaking to Eleanor. He was revealing the man behind the title, a man who was often lonely, burdened by duty, and hungry for a meeting of minds. The external world provided an unexpected opportunity to solidify their new, fragile partnership. Lord Harrington, the man whose idle comment had spurred Alistair's own dismissive remark, came to visit. He was a creature of gossip and superficiality, the embodiment of the world Alistair was beginning to reject. At dinner, Harrington, oblivious to the sea change in the Blackwood household, attempted to engage Eleanor in what he considered suitable conversation. "And how do you find the country life, Duchess?" he asked, with a patronizing smile. "I imagine the society is a trifle dull after London. Do you find enough needlepoint to occupy your time?" Before Eleanor could respond, Alistair placed his wineglass down with a quiet, deliberate click. "My wife has little time for needlepoint, Harrington," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "She is currently occupied with translating the Codex Argentius from the Gothic and advising me on a rather tricky bit of legislation regarding clerical appointments. Perhaps you have an opinion on the matter?" Harrington stared, his mouth slightly agape. He had no opinion on the matter. He barely knew what the Codex Argentius was. He stammered a reply and quickly changed the subject. Later that evening, as they sat in the library, together now, in chairs placed near the fire, Eleanor looked at him. "That was not necessary," she said. "His opinion is of no consequence to me." "It is of consequence to me," Alistair replied, his gray eyes serious. "I will not stand by and listen to any man, myself included, diminish you ever again. It was a public foolishness. It required a public correction." In that moment, she saw that his change was real. It was not just about making his own life more comfortable. It was about honoring her. It was about protecting her. The door that had clicked shut so quietly inside her began, finally, to creak open. The declaration, when it came, was not a grand pronouncement. It was as quiet and profound as the changes that had preceded it. They were walking in the gardens one late spring evening. The air was soft, filled with the scent of roses and damp earth. For months, they had existed in this new state of intellectual companionship, a truce that had slowly warmed into a genuine friendship. He stopped by a stone bench overlooking the rolling hills of his estate. "I have been thinking about our wedding, Eleanor," he said. She tensed slightly, waiting. "It was a transaction," he continued, looking out at the landscape. "A merger of assets. I offered you a title and security. You provided a dowry and the promise of an heir. The terms were clear." He turned to face her, and she saw a deep vulnerability in his eyes she had never seen before. "I wish to renegotiate." "Renegotiate?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The original contract is null and void. It was based on a false prospectus. My prospectus." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was not possessive, but tentative, a question. "I am not offering you a title, or a house, or my protection. You have all of those things, and you have proven you need none of them to be extraordinary. I am offering me, Alistair, my respect, which you have commanded, my admiration, which you have earned, and my love, which you have, against all odds, and with no effort whatsoever, completely and irrevocably captured." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "I love you, Eleanor. I love your mind, and your wit, and your quiet strength. I love the woman who reads German agricultural texts, and the woman who sees the ambiguity in a Latin verb. I am asking if you would consider a new arrangement, not as Duke and Duchess, but as husband and wife, as partners, as friends." Tears welled in her eyes. They were not tears of sadness or anger, but of a slow, thawing relief. The cold, crystalline structure she had built around her heart was finally melting. "I believe," she said, a small, true smile gracing her lips for the first time in his presence, "that those terms are acceptable." A year later, the Archbishop came to visit again. He found the Duke and Duchess in the East Wing library, surrounded by books, a comfortable clutter of papers and teacups between them. They were bent over a large, ancient map, arguing animatedly, but with great affection about the location of a lost Roman road. The house was different. It was no longer a place of rigid, silent order. There was music, sometimes the pianoforte, sometimes Eleanor's laughter. There were conversations that echoed in the halls, debates that lasted long into the night. The house was alive, filled with the energy of two minds, two hearts that had finally found their rhythm. The nursery on the second floor, long empty, was being repainted in a soft, sunny yellow. A small cradle sat in the corner, awaiting its new occupant. It was a symbol not of duty fulfilled, but of a union joyfully affirmed. That evening, as Alistair stood by the window of their shared bedroom, watching the moon rise over his lands, Eleanor came to stand beside him. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He looked down at her, at the brilliant, beautiful woman who was his wife, his partner, his entire world. He thought of the man he had been, the arrogant, blind man who had valued silence over substance, who had looked at a star and seen only a faint, distant light. He remembered his callous, confident prediction to Harrington. "She will bore the Archbishop." He smiled, a genuine expression of profound and lasting gratitude. "I was just thinking," he said, pulling her closer, "that I have never been so happy to have been so wrong.